Yes.
Now, I want to talk today about the Indian peacekeeping force that went to Sri Lanka.
Oh, okay.
Now, this is a very hot subject.
Hmm.
Many people have various views on the subject,
Right.
and I can tell you what I felt about. I was the army commander in Eastern Army when this business of Sri Lanka started. In fact, General Sundarji, my predecessor, had run the exercise called Brass Tacks, where I had not even left for Eastern Army, but I was the commandant of the College of Combat, which is now the Army War College. And I was made the chief umpire for this exercise. But during this exercise, I did happen to overhear some conversation between the Air Chief Marshal LaFontaine in those days and General Sundarji, the Army Chief, discussing various aspects of this entry into Sri Lanka. And then we came to know that there's something brewing here. Later, after the Indian Army had gone into Sri Lanka, and I was still in Eastern Army, I got a call from the Director General Military Operations, who was Lieutenant General B.C. Joshi. I mentioned his name before in the context of the Siachen Glacier. Now, he later became the Army Chief, by the way. Anyway, he was in charge of the military operations, and he rang me up, and he says the instructions are that we want one division. A division comprises a Major General's command and about 15,000 troops. So we wanted one division from Eastern Army to report immediately, forthwith, to Sri Lanka. So I said, I'm sorry, my divisions are no longer trained for counterinsurgency and anti-terrorist organizations since the Mizoram problem had settled down and the Nagaland problem was well on the way to solution. So I said we will require at least 2-3 weeks of training before I send a division there. So he told me, no, don't worry, we will be back in a few weeks. So his name is Bipin Joshi. I said, Bipin, you have no idea what you're talking about. If you're going into Sri Lanka where there is a terrorist group called the LTTE, led by a person called Prabhakaran, who is contesting not only the Indian military, but also the Sri Lanka military, nothing is going to finish in 2-3 weeks. It's going to take a few years. He said, no, General, as far as our assessment is concerned, you'll be back within 2-3 weeks. I said, no way. Nevertheless, I'm going to take 3 weeks to train this division before I send it to Sri Lanka. He also asked me for the Eastern Command so-called riverboat Navy fleet that we had. I've spoken about it earlier. These are the large load-carrying ships on the Hooghly River. And we have got recruited from the fishermen of the Hooghly River, right up to the rank of JCO and NCOs and so on, who man these boats. They were a great help for supply of ammunition and supplies and tanks and things during the Bangladesh War, or rather the war against East Pakistan, 1971. So these ships were required by the Military Operations Directorate to go down the coast of India to a place called Trincomalee, which is the harbor on the eastern coast of Sri Lanka. It's a very good harbor. It was used by the British during the campaign against the Japanese during World War II. It's a huge bay, plus a harbor, very well located, and a natural harbor, one of the best in the world, in fact. So they wanted them to come to Trincomalee to assist in supplies to our various troops there by sea rather than by land. So I said, yes, all right, we'll have to get these done. And so we did that. We sent 4 or 5 of these huge boats. They had to get engine changes in Madras by the time they were going there. Nevertheless, we got them there. Meanwhile, I trained a division, took it to the Sikkim regions, which I knew very well, trained them very thoroughly in jungle mountainous terrain. And after 2-3 weeks, we sent this division 57 Mountain Division to Sri Lanka. And because of this training, this division, despite having done very successful operations, didn't have a single casualty, whereas other divisions had had quite a lot of casualties. Anyway, now when I became the chief, the position in Sri Lanka was such, it was a sort of a, I would call it a sort of a stalemate. The Indian army was there in quite massive numbers, but the terrorists were still functioning. Now let me give you a bit of the background. The problem of Sri Lanka and India dates back to the British Raj, almost 100 years ago, 200, 150 years ago. What happened is that when the British had control of Ceylon, as it was called then, Burma, Ceylon, India, they had sent a large number of Indians to the central part of Lanka, or Colombo in those days, of Ceylon, as tea garden workers. That's in the Kandy area. In addition, a large number of Tamils had crossed over from Tamil Nadu coast. It's only about a 23-kilometer gap to the Ceylon coast, where they had settled down to also do rice farming and things like that. Now that's because the local people were not very adept at this, and the British felt that the Indian labor doing this sort of work is far more efficient, and they sent these people there. So now what you have is that Tamils were in Kandy, which is in central of Sri Lanka, doing tea garden work. There's a large number of Tamils in northern Sri Lanka, which is the Jaffna province, Jaffna being the capital. And they are cheek by jowl with the Indian coast of Tamil Nadu, and a lot of smuggling taking place. People could get onto, a jerry can. You know what a jerry can is, where you fill petrol in your car or something. You can put two jerry cans together and just float across, either to India or to Lanka, as we call it, or Ceylon in the old days. So since Ceylon was a separate country, it had a lot of Japanese goods and things, which could be smuggled to Madras and sold there, and Indian stuff, which was not available in Ceylon, was brought back. So there was a healthy smuggling trade going on. Meanwhile, what happened is that the people of Sri Lanka who were settled there in earlier days are the Sinhalese. The Sinhalese are a Buddhist group of people. They are the majority population. And if you look back in history to see where did they come from, basically they are the Santhal tribes from areas of Orissa and Bihar of India. In Orissa and Bihar, we had a very good trading post near the Jagannath Puri temple. Kunarak is the name of the port. In the days of Ashoka the Great and so on, there was a huge trade to Southeast Asia, etc. from here. Trade of culture and goods. As they say, in those days, Indians conquered the whole of Southeast Asia by love and trade, not by bullets. So many of these Santhals were very good seamen, moved down the coast and found this lovely Pearl Island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Plenty of fish, plenty of trees, plenty of fruit, coconut, everything. So they settled there. Now, these are Sinhalese of Buddhist extraction, because as you know, Ashoka the Great was a Buddhist. And they speak a language which is Sinhalese. Now, the northern part of the island and the eastern part of the island, that's the Trincomalee area, and a little further south, a place called Batikalo of Trincomalee, there was a settlement of South Indians. Now, South Indians comprise not only Hindus, but Muslims. Mostly the Muslims were near the Batikalo area, and the South Indian Tamils were in the Jaffna province. Now, in Lanka, what has happened is, even from the British day, once Colombo, or rather Ceylon, got its independence from the British, they treated the Tamils as second-class citizens, lower in quality, lower in the looks, lower in efficiency, and hence they were not given the central government jobs and things like in the army or in central secretariats and things like that, because they were the lesser mortals. Sinhalese felt that they, the Buddhists, were superior to the Hindu Tamils or the Muslim Tamils. The result of this was that there was a little dichotomy going on between the Sinhalese and the Tamils. The Sinhalese army, the Sri Lankan army, let's call it now, started operations against these people because they were getting too, what shall I say, violent and demanding their position in society as equal citizens. And this depredation by the Sri Lankan army forced the Tamilians to run away from their lands and towns in Jaffna province. And there's a peninsula which is on the northeastern coast of Sri Lanka, known as the Talai Manar Peninsula. It's a strip of land about 20, 30 kilometers long and about 10 kilometers wide, which sticks out into the ocean in the northern part of the Sri Lankan coast. Once the Tamils had been brought there, then the Lankan army, Sri Lankan army, sealed the lower portion, the southern portion, so that these chaps were stopped there. And then they stopped all food and rations and things like that. Now the problem, as I said, was since the British days. The British left it as a bubbling problem, let's call it, because it was really a question of the Buddhist Sinhalese against the Hindu and Muslim Tamils. And now, by the time it came to our time, the Sri Lankans had been encouraged perhaps by India itself. I mean, the Tamil, that if you want to survive, you've got to be capable of defending yourself. So with the assistance of RNAW and the southern state of Madras, led by Karunanidhi at that time, weapons, training, etc. was food, ammunition was sent from the Indian coast to the northern parts of Sri Lanka. There were about 6 or 7 terrorist groups that were created with various names. LTTE, the Tamil, they were known as the Tamil Tigers. It was led by a man called Prabhakar, who, by the way, came and consulted Rajiv Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister at that time. And in their powwow, none of us knew exactly what that powwow was, but some deal was done, maybe to the effect that you support us and we will hold our own in Sri Lanka against the depredations of the Sri Lankan army. So all this was going on. Meanwhile, as I said, these Tamils had rushed into the Talai Manar Peninsula, and Prabhakaran and his group were finding that they're short of food and water and so on, because this was sealed from the southern portion of the peninsula by the Lankan army. Now, that time you will recollect, this is about 1987 now, that Rajiv Gandhi decided to intervene. He intervened by dropping food parcels in Talai Manar. Now, he had about 3 or 4 heavy 2-engined and 4-engined aircraft of the IAF, of the Indian Air Force, to carry these stores and drop them by parachute to the Talai Manar Peninsula, telling the world and the public that this is a humanitarian intervention because those poor Tamils are starving, they don't have food, etc., so we must help. But because Sri Lanka had a small little air force, they must have had 3 or 4 fighter bombers. This group of heavy transport was escorted and defended by a half squadron of fighter bombers, MiG-21s, I mean these Mirage aircraft of France, etc., so that if any opposition took place, that would be defended. So this was carried out. Of course, Sri Lanka screamed all over the place, including the United Nations, that this is intervention. of our airspace. It's an attack on the Sri Lankan airspace by India. This is the scene. Now, the point here was that what the Indian government wanted, politically, let's look at it, was that the Sri Lankan Tamils cannot be accepted back in India because there is a very large population of them. And we had enough of a population in India itself. And the Tamil Nadu state could not absorb millions of more Tamils coming in from Sri Lanka. So the question of these people coming away from Sri Lanka and going back to India was not acceptable. So Sri Lankan government was told that this is not acceptable. Meanwhile, this conflict started because once the Tamils got armed, they created about 5 or 6 terrorist groups. LTT was the main one. There were a number of others, PLOT, the whole sort of alphabets. I won't go into that. And if you recollect, when we spoke of the Maldives operation, and I said 200 terrorists from Sri Lanka had moved into the Maldives where the Indian Army carried out its operation, these were the same groups, these terrorist groups, number of 6 or 7 of them in northern Sri Lanka. Now, when General Sundarji was the army chief, he was asked by the Prime Minister that if things come from bad to worse and Sri Lankan Tamils are getting scuppered by the Sri Lankan army, of the Sinhalese army. So we sent the army in, our Indian army in there. So how long do you think it might take for you to control this business of we are sort of a peacekeeping force between the Sri Lankan army and the Tamil terrorist group so that peace could be restored. So it was called the Indian Peacekeeping Force. So I think General Sundarji at that time probably said, well, it'll take a few weeks or a couple of months, which perhaps was not a correct assessment because one never knows how things turn out. Anything that takes place anywhere in the world is an action and reaction aspect. If you introduce troops into a certain place, then there may be other actions and reactions taking place in the local area, and one has to be prepared for that. Now, since all of us in the Eastern Army, at least, were very well-trained in the business of counter-insurgency and counter-terrorist operations in Nagaland, in Mizoram, and Manipur, and all these places, we knew that, let us say, the Nagaland problem in India started in 1956. It's still a bit of it going on after 73 years. So, yes, it's peace there, but this little bit of bullshitting goes on. So now, no question of it finishing in 2-3 weeks. So that assessment perhaps is incorrect. Secondly, Rajiv Gandhi was in contact with the LTT boss, that is Prabhakaran, and appeared that Prabhakaran assured him that if the Indian army comes, peace will be ensured. See, all right. So what is the aim? I think the way I assessed it, the political aim appeared to be to give Tamils the equal rights for citizenship in the rest of Sri Lanka and get the government of Sri Lanka to accept that. That means jobs will be open in central government services, including the military and so on, and also the bureaucracy. And secondly, that, India has a system of governance where you have separate states which are electing their chief ministers. So India looked at it from that point of view, that you could have separate states in northern and eastern Sri Lanka, where the Muslim groups, Tamil groups in eastern Sri Lanka, or the Hindu Tamil groups in northern Sri Lanka could have their own state and their own elected head. But Sri Lanka's administration is not functioning like that. It is more functioning like the British system, because it's a small island compared to the vast land of India. So therefore, they have a central government which controls all provinces. Like in Britain, for instance, the MPs of the parliament are dealing with various constituencies within the British Isles and Northern Ireland. There are no separate chief ministers and election of separate states because it's too small. There are various counties there which come under the minister directly in the parliament. That is how Sri Lanka was running. So they did not seem to appreciate India's view that there should be any separatism. They said there can't be any separatism. See? So anyway, that little argument took place. So the Indian peacekeeping force was introduced there. It was a disparate group, about a couple of battalions north and couple of battalions east and couple of battalions northeast. But then what happened is that suddenly things started going wrong, because what happened is that the Indian peacekeeping forces commanding officer was the Lieutenant General Amar Singh Kalkat. Now, I knew his uncle very well. I have told you earlier when I was G2 Ops of 19th Division as a major after my staff college in 1963. So we had a very fine officer, Brigadier, later Major General Onkar Singh Kalkat, in 114 Brigade, the Titwal and Tangdhar sector of J&K. Brilliant tactician and a very, very brilliant commander. And we all looked up to him to see how best to deal with the Pakistanis on the opposite side of the border, or for that matter, any other problem. He was no more, of course, but he was the uncle of this Amar Kalkat. But Amar Kalkat was, I don't think he was much comparison to his uncle, but nonetheless, he was a Lieutenant General and he was the IPKF commander, located in Chennai, which was known as Madras in those days. Now, they were moved across to Sri Lanka by boat and by air to occupy certain areas in the Jaffna province. While this was going on and the peace deal was going on, the question arose of no more fighting between the Sri Lankan army and the terrorist groups, where the main terrorist group was the LTT led by Prabhakar. Now, how is it that the Indian army at that time, mark you, at this time, General Sundarji was still the chief, turned against the LTT? This subject is of much discussion all over the press. I'll explain what happened. What happened is that the government of India politically wanted all these 5 or 6 separate groups of Sri Lankan terrorists with various alphabetical names to get together with a single point of desire for the Sri Lankan government. Indian government suggested a number of points. They said, firstly, you should be treated as equal citizens of the rest of the population of Sri Lanka. Secondly, since you're going to be treated as equal citizens, you must demand that the Tamil language also be accepted as a national language. As you know, the main language would be Sinhalese, but this would be another language. As you know, in India, we have got a large number of languages accepted in the Constitution of India. India has over maybe 700 or more languages, but at least 100 of them are acceptable in the Constitution of India. So that if you write a letter to Tamil Nadu today, you want to write in English, but unless you send a copy in Tamil, they're not going to even look at it. So we accept that the linguistic provinces are necessary. This is from Jawaharlal Nehru's days. So in Sri Lanka, the suggestion was that Tamil should also be accepted as a national language. These are the main points. And then politically, when you stand for elections, there should be seats which the Sri Lankan Tamils could contest. And if they do win in the respective areas, like the northern provinces or the eastern provinces, then they shall be allowed to participate in parliamentary procedures. All right, that's all very reasonable. So we wanted, that the Indian government wanted all the Tamils to get together. So they suggested to the Tamil 6 or 7 separate terrorist groups that you get together. So Prabhakaran, who was the strongest group, the LTT, he said, okay, fine, I'll host this conference. And he had a place in Jaffna where all leaders of the 6 or 7 other Tamil groups were invited. And they said that don't worry about arms and ammunition. You can leave your arms outside. We're all friends, and we will come to the conclusion as to how politically, what is our demand from Sri Lankan government. Now, as the event took place, the IPK was in Sri Lanka, and this was reported to them. They had observers on this also. All the Tamil leaders got together in this hall, about 8 or 9 of them, and Prabhakaran was conducting the ceremony, and when everybody was inside, his gunmen shot the whole lot. So all the other Tamil leaders were shot dead. So Prabhakaran stated that I don't accept any other Tamil leader. I am the only leader, and that's it. Since he shot the other leaders, there was no say there. But the Indian peacekeeping force, led by Amar Kalkat at that time, with the acceptance of the army chief at that time, Sundarji, and the Southern Army commander was Lieutenant General Chatterjee. He also accepted this, that this is not accepted move by the LTT. So there was a dichotomy of the Indian Army turning against the LTTE vis-a-vis the fact that the LTT was raised and supported by the RNAW of India and by the politics of India. Another incident took place, which I shall describe. Because the IPKF desired peace, the first question that was raised is a large number of Sri Lankan prisoners, about maybe 40, 50 of them, which had been captured by the Tamils in the northern region of Jaffna. And they had been housed in a place called Jaffna Fort, which is south of Jaffna city, and protected there as prisoners of war. Similarly, the Sri Lankan army had also captured a number of Tamils who were located in Colombo. So Prabhakaran has suggested that let's have a swapping of the prisoners. And he said that since I don't trust the Sri Lankans, they should send their prisoners, Tamil prisoners that they've got to us first, to Jaffna. There's an airfield near Jaffna, near the coast, north of Jaffna. And after they've done that, I will, in the same aircraft, send the Sri Lankan prisoners back to them. So about 25 or 30 Tamil prisoners were sent by air. By the way, the air was provided by the IPK. So transport aircraft was sent to Colombo, and these prisoners were loaded and they were landed on the Jaffna airstrip and handed over to Prabhakaran. And the aircraft was waiting on the airstrip for the Sri Lankan prisoners to be brought so they could be conveyed back to Colombo. Now, what we found was that Jaffna Fort is about maybe 15, 20 kilometers further south of the airstrip. So Tamil, Prabhakaran's LTT guard took all these prisoners and started marching them from Jaffna Fort through Jaffna city up to the northwards to the airstrip. On the way, his guards shot every one of those Sri Lankan prisoners. Now that created a huge outcry. And the Sri Lankan government told the IPKF and the government of India that we are not sure whether you're a peacekeeping force or you're only supporting the Tamils, because they shot all our prisoners, despite the fact that we had returned our prisoners. So the IPKF took a dim view of this and threatened Prabhakar, the leader, that we will have to proceed against you for having done this. Why did you shoot these prisoners? So Prabhakaran's answer was that, well, they started running away. So because they started running away, we shot. So we said, come on, that's a very lame excuse, because they can't run away into the jungles of northern Sri Lanka. It's a hell of a distance to go back to Colombo. The aircraft are waiting for them to take them back to their homes. What do you mean they ran away? So you shot them dead for the heck of it. Anyway, that is the scene. So the IPKF moved against Prabhakaran and his terrorists. Now, I must explain to you that from a person like me, who was the Eastern Army commander at that time, what I saw was that the right hand of the government of India, that's the military, was really operating against the left hand of the government of India, with the intelligence organizations, the RNAW and so on, who were supporting Prabhakaran with arms, equipment, sending the injured people back to Tamil Nadu for repair and recovery and rest and relief. And it was an interesting scene, but shows that politically the matter was not managed too well. There's a little incident that took place before all this, when Sri Lanka accepted that the IPKF should come into northern provinces to be a peacekeeping force, Rajiv Gandhi visited Colombo. The president of Sri Lanka was a gentleman by the name of Jayawardena. So I was explained this by Jayawardena himself. Rajiv Gandhi came there, and Jayawardena said that we really had no option because the Indian Prime Minister said we are already assisting by food and supplies to Sri Lankan terrorists. So you have to agree to the IPKF coming here to create a peace line between the Sri Lankans and the Tamils. So Jayawardena said that, yes, all right, with no option, we will have to accept that. I don't know if you recollect, there was a scene on our television and also in the newspapers when Rajiv Gandhi was inspecting the Guard of Honor given by Colombo. One of the soldiers took his butt of the rifle and tried to hit him on the back. And he managed to duck in time because he's a sharp fellow. And instead of hitting him on his head, it hit him on his shoulder. But that chap was arrested, of course. But it showed the feeling of the Sri Lankan troops about our Prime Minister at that point of time. Obviously, there were some management problems here. All right. Now, when the IPKF turned against the LTT, so this war started off, and the Sri Lankans sat back and watched with maybe a big grin on their face when the Indian army, comprising Indian troops, were fighting the Tamils of LTT Prabhakar. Now, let me describe a few points about Prabhakar. A very interesting character. Much study is required to understand this person. Many people call him a megalomaniac who wanted supremacy, wanted his own country. It was known as Tamil Eelam. The Tamil Eelam, as I could understand, was a country of the Tamils. This would comprise southern India, including Kerala and Tamil Nadu, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, who have a large number of Tamil populations, southern Malaysia, which has got a large number of Tamil population, and northern Surabaya, which is part of Indonesia, because there also there are a lot of Tamil population. So this was across, and the oceans in between, that's the lower half of the Bay of Bengal and the northeastern part of the Indian Ocean, would also belong to the state of Tamil Eelam. So he wanted this. And then to support him, I would say that whether it was America or Britain or Western Europe or Malaysia or Indonesia, they all supporting because the Tamil groups there were very well to do. They were in very high positions. A large amount of funds were gathered, and arms, weapons, equipment, explosives, you name it, the latest designs of explosives and detonators were being sent from abroad to the LTTE to carry out its fight against the Indian military. Now, even Pakistan was thrilled that the Indian military has got involved in a local fight in Sri Lanka. So they were also assisting because their ambassador in Colombo was a school friend of mine from the RIMC, a person called Tariq Mohammed Mir. And later when we met in life, after both of us had retired, he told me that we were very happy that the Indian army got stuck here, and we were hoping they were stuck here forever, just like the American army got stuck in Vietnam for even 10, 15 years, so that Pakistan would have a better position on the borders against India and Kashmir. So anyway, that was it. Now this was the situation when I took over as the army chief. I visited Colombo. I met Mr. Jayawardena and his very charming lady. Shruti was with me. We spent 3 days in Colombo and met all their top leadership. The chief secretary, the defense secretary, the minister in charge of defense, the minister in charge of home affairs and foreign relations, and also the president, who was Mr. Jayawardena. In fact, and by the way, there are Oberoi hotels that we were staying in Colombo, very well-appointed hotels. The Indian embassy and the then High Commissioner of India, they also met us and toasted us and hosted us. And they arranged a visit for me to Colombo also. And I took Shruti with me. We went to Kandy, where the tea garden workers, etc., are to meet some of the Buddhist leaders and to meet some of the Buddhist, to go and see some of the Buddhist temples. It's a very high class, very religious, a lot of power of the Buddhist group there. When he came back, they had given me an LO, a Major General Vanasinghe, a very fine man, a very gentle person. And Major General Vanasinghe at that time asked me, that he said his son is studying in a school in Kandy, but there are Tamil terrorists there also, because the tea garden workers were all Tamils. He asked me, he said, General, I have a problem because they are threatening, because he was in charge of operations, this Vanasinghe. He says, they're threatening that the terrorists will kill my son. So can you help? I said, yes, I can help. If you don't mind, I'll take him back to India and put him in a good school there. And if necessary, commission him as a military officer. So he was about 12 or 13 years old. And so therefore, in any institution in India, either you join in kindergarten or you join in standard 1, and 12, 13 years is somewhere in between. Normally schools are reluctant to accept. I said, don't worry, I'll get him done. And in the event, I visited in Lovedale, which is near Uttakamand. We've got Lawrence School. There's a Lawrence School in Sanawa and there's a Lawrence School in Lovedale. So I visited Lawrence School in Lovedale and I met these people. I said, look, this is what I want. So the principal there is a very good man. He was very happy that he came there. He said, General, why don't you present me a few military things? My boys are very keen. And he had a group of horses also. He said, my horses are lame and old and blind in one eye. What about giving me some better horses? So I said, all right, I'll give you 2 horses, which are in fit condition. And I'll send up some military equipment. I can't send a tank here, but I'll send a few guns and things. But we'll get this boy inside. He says, all right, we'll get the boy, we'll train him well, and he'll do his senior Cambridge and his inter science or whatever it was in those days. And then if necessary, send him for commissioning. I also started in Uttakamand, in Tamil Nadu, in Madras, the Officers Training Academy, because I had been requested by the Sri Lankan Army that they want to commission about 50 or 60 young men as officers. But because of the terrorism going on in Sri Lanka, it was not easy to run that in Sri Lanka. So we accepted them in OTA Madras, Officers Training Academy in Madras, and we commissioned about 50 or 60 of them, or 100 of them, I'm not sure. So that was that. So we had good relations with the government of Sri Lanka. And meanwhile, this IPK business is going on. There was a struggle going on here. Now, I must tell you that the Tamil terrorists, very high-class terrorists, they're as good as any in the world. Many people believe that only Muslims can be terrorists. But I can assure you, these are all Hindus. And even their women, Buddhists, were very good terrorists. We had the highest respect for them because they could do all sorts of, they're very clever. And they had, I found that, for instance, if a truck is going along the road, a mine is exploded under the truck. You know, these are tarmac roads. And they're all about 2-3 feet higher than the surrounding territory because during the rains, it all gets flooded. You see? No. For instance, how do you blow up a truck? Because if you put a mine on the road, you have to dig it in. If you dig it in, it's visible. But what they do is, because the road was embankments, about 2-3 feet higher than the rest of the ground, they take a, let us say, a water pipe, a zinc water pipe, and they tap it through under the tarmac, through the side of the road, and it's full of explosives. Then you lead a line to a